Good morning and welcome to Ask the Expert. I'm Joe Taylor. This morning, another in the ongoing series of programs presented by the Regional Early Learning Resource Center. The program, through the Northwest Institute of Research, oversees a grant from the Office of Child Development and Early Learning at the Pennsylvania Department of Human Services and the Department of Education. The goal of the program is to improve the outcomes for young children as they prepare for school. John Posa from the Early Learning Resource Center is the host of the program and is with us throughout the series. And this morning, John, we go up to the even more frigid, frozen north, right up to Erie, right?
Yes, we're so pleased, thanks, Joe, to welcome this morning Chris Marsh, who is the Chief Community and Economic Development Officer for the Erie Insurance Group. And Chris has also just recently been appointed by Governor Wolf as a commissioner for the Early Learning Investment Commission. So welcome to the program, Chris.
Thank you, John. I appreciate the opportunity to talk with you today.
Yeah, thank you. On this very, very cold day, we're all trying to stay bundled up here. I wanted to ask you, how did your appointment to the Early Learning Investment Commission come about? Was it a surprise? And tell me a little bit about that.
Sure. And yes, it is a little frigid out there still. I have always had a passion for education. And it shows up in my life and in my background. I have 3 boys. I've actually had positions on different school boards at various grade levels along the way, helped influence policy, student outcomes. And a colleague of mine here at Erie Insurance knew that about me. And she was approached by then Executive Director of the Pennsylvania Early Learning Investment Commission about wanting to have a commissioner from Erie Insurance. We had a commissioner at one time a few years back, and so she immediately thought of me, asked if I would be interested. I actually knew nothing about the Pennsylvania Early Learning Investment Commission at that time, John.
Right.
But the more I learned about it, the more interested I became. So in October, it was an honor to go to the governor's mansion and really become a critical part of moving the quality and access of early learning in our community.
Yeah, I will say that we had on a previous program Michael Plazzoni from Erie Insurance.
That was it, Michael.
Yeah, Michael, and he did a great job. So we're really glad to have any representation from Erie Insurance. So they're obviously a well-recognized organization. Let's talk a little bit about the economics of childcare, if you don't mind. It's kind of timely in a way. Governor Wolf, just this week actually, is proposing raising the minimum wage to $12 an hour in Pennsylvania. Now there's both sides of that issue, pros and cons of what that would do to our economy. One of the things that we've been struggling with, this isn't just in Pennsylvania but across the country, but in a tightening job market, the inability of many programs to offer child care workers living competitive wages and benefits is actually shrinking the supply of quality care because of turnover. Those who work in child care can't make enough money, move on, and it's really impacting child care in general when we most need that supply to even be greater than it already is. What's your take on what possibly we can do, regionally, locally, as a country in terms of, getting the word out about the importance that those who work in childcare have in preparing our kids for school and in life?
Yeah, I think you're spot on, John. Getting the word out is part of really the first step. And one of the reasons I say that is since being appointed, I've had a chance to actually meet with several of the directors and some of the teachers and staff at a few of the local early learning centers. And I was actually amazed to hear the struggle and challenge that they have regarding their workforce, from not only an attraction, which is what you're getting at, also a retention.
Right.
And so there's certainly work ahead of us. One thing that I know from a business perspective is once you create the strong case, a business case, then I would expect that that data and that business case would certainly be so compelling that we would be able to work with those at the state level, certainly the legislators at the local level, to really change that. We are in Erie County. We struggle with the connection of having the right, ready workforce
Right.
For the jobs that are available. We hear that all the time. And this is a way, through early learning, the investments made today in early learning will have a sustainable impact on our community for generations to close that gap. So that is certainly something we need to figure out, and the Commission is ready to work on that as a top priority.
Can I expand a little bit on making the case with business leaders in the sense of making it for their backing early childhood learning? When you're dealing with business leaders, obviously they're by necessity motivated by profit and loss ledger. How do you make the case that investing in early learning is something that they should support? You alluded to it briefly there, but maybe expand a little bit on that.
Yeah, so I've been looking over some research and stats around that, and there's a couple that I would point to that really jumped off the page at me that I was not aware of. One has to do with the long-term research study done by James Heckman that was released in 2016. I'm sure that are both very familiar with it. Heckman, this Nobel Prize-winning economist, analyzed preschool data from North Carolina and concluded that the states that invest in quality early childhood education actually stimulate their economies differently than those that do not. They have higher achieving workers. They spend less money than they would on remedial education, health, and criminal justice. So overall, at the end of that study, Heckman basically calculated that states could see an annual return of up to 13%. Well, I don't know about you, but there's not too many, stock market returns that come in at 13%, or $13 for every $1 invested. So, when I look at the highest level for Erie County specifically, it's been proven that high-quality early childhood education provides long-lasting positive effects, and you both know this. They're more likely to succeed in school, they're more likely to graduate on time, and they're more likely to enter a skilled workforce. So if this is true, if we look at Erie County and the impact of moving the needle on our current stats, where more than 68% of eligible children of subsidized childcare are being underserved today, and less than half of all eligible children for publicly funded high-quality pre-K are not even being enrolled. The poverty rate of our Erie City School District is 61%. That's almost 7,000 students across the city in that school district alone. And at the state level, the poverty rate of all state students in public schools is 35%, which is still astounding. And we're almost double that. So if we believe that education is that poverty crusher, if it also creates the opportunity for a steady workforce pipeline down the road, then as a business community, I do believe that we need to do more. And those are just a few of the stats that jumped off the page at me.
As a follow-up, is there any kind of a dollar amount figure or formula for calculating what the Commission is looking for in terms of contribution from the business community?
We don't have that yet. I know that we've talked about taking a serious look about doing some fundraising. I had the privilege of participating in the fundraising for our recent effort, Erie Downtown Development Corp., of which Erie Insurance was a leader in. And during that time, we understood what the need was, and then we created a target goal. So if we were to revitalize the downtown, we knew we needed at least $30 million of private funds from the business and the philanthropy community to really begin making a difference. And I think in the early learning side of the house, too, I think there's something to that, really identifying what the target is. I know we're going more regional, so we're taking that big state view, but then kind of taking a regional look, a local look, creating that target, and then really building a case to go after the funding, whether it's on the public side or the private side.
And the thing
I don't know. I don't have a number today.
Right. And of course, the importance and funding for early childhood education in Pennsylvania is really it goes across both aisles in terms of support, and the questioning that comes down to then numbers, and when we talk about businesses and things that they could do, one of the programs I often bring up on the program is the Educational Improvement Tax Credit. Which I'm sure, Christy, you're well aware of.
Yes.
That's a program that it could be used for other educational, investments, but, there is an opportunity to actually use that to invest in early childhood programs. What's your experience with that? And do you think that there maybe businesses need to know a little bit more about how that can have an impact?
Yeah, that's a great point. That's a resource that's available today, to your point.
Right.
Erie Insurance certainly leverages it from the funding side, the tax credit side. I was part of our Erie First Christian Academy. We had a very passionate parent that believed so much in this tax credit that he would go through the different churches and actually kind of make a plea for, hey, if you're a business owner and you have this available, it's no cost to you, just consider that. When you're doing your taxes, when you're with your financial planner, consider that. So I think, too, that's another awareness raising. I don't know if it's getting more of the financial planners and tax preparers, maybe in our different regions, more aware of that credit, too, so they could spread the word or challenge the thinking or make that a little bit more accessible.
And just so our folks, listeners that may not be aware, we call it EITC for short. It's Educational Improvement Tax Credit. That's allow businesses that qualify to take that tax credit. It's in other words, it's taken off of what they would normally pay directly in taxes. It's actually going to an educational entity. So
That's right.
Yeah. We've talked about this, our policies, increasingly push parents into the workforce, making the availability of affordable quality childcare even that much more critical. I made that point before. And so with this being the case, and we're always struggling for additional funding to fund early childhood education, some would maybe believe that the only viable solution to where, is maybe having universal childcare, or seeing public childcare the same way we view K-12 education, meaning that we all agree to pay and sharing the bill. I mean, that's been floated out there. I don't know how seriously it's been taken, what the chances of that ever happening. But universal childcare is actually an option in several other states. Do you think that could ever possibly be the case in Pennsylvania?
John, I'm fairly new to this. I actually have not heard that as a consideration for Pennsylvania, so I'm making myself a note to follow up on that.
Right.
Do I think it's possible? I think anything is possible, depending on timing and advocates that we have at the state level, certainly. Right.
I bring that up because one of our neighboring states, and the one that just pops out to me all the time, is West Virginia. And West Virginia does a remarkable job in their early childhood programming. And they do offer universal child care. And yet here's a state much, much smaller than Pennsylvania, has many economic difficulty and issues, especially with the coal industry, which was so vital there for so many years, being down. And although it has, the economy in West Virginia has definitely made a rebound, but here's a state that sees that as a priority. And I just, I struggle with the fact that why, we can't, we can't look at it the same way in Pennsylvania, but we can only be hopeful. Let's put it that way. There's other solutions, but that was just one that was floated out there. I wanted to ask you more about some of the initiatives with the Early Learning Investment Commission. I know you were at your initial meeting where the governor spoke and hosted it at the mansion. What are some of the key initiatives like this year and beyond that the commission is going to be working toward?
Sure. I know that there's a real push, and remember at that time in October, we were right in front of the midterm election cycle in Pennsylvania.
Right.
So we actually spent time, dedicated time during our meeting, grouped by our region commissioners. So I had a chance to meet with Brad Gosser from Mercer County.
Right.
And he and I were brainstorming on, meeting with our newest legislators, Bob Mursky, of course, being our newest state representative. We did have a chance to meet with him in December. And really the message there was, as soon as you can, from the commission, our charge was as soon as you can, get with some of those newer elected officials so that from the start they have an appreciation for the impact and the need for quality early learning education for all. And of course, Bob Mursky was an easy one. He certainly gets it given his background in teaching and public service.
Right.
What I will say, there are other certainly strategic plays that, aside from advocacy and raising awareness, that the commission is doing. They have a strategic plan that they've been working on, and they shared with us when we were all together in October. They're planning to do some studies that we should know more in 2019 based upon reports that are focusing on business leaders and providers in the greater Susquehanna Valley and Blair County areas. Two other groups are working on ideas to build quality funds that would invest in early childhood programs to increase their quality rating to serve children better and strengthen their financial sustainability. So what I took away from that is, as they're working on kind of understanding more what success looks like in these other parts of Pennsylvania, that we all can learn from that. And hopefully, I think some of your earlier points really is, how can we start percolating that up to the state level so it becomes more accepted, more broadly accepted?
I have a question regarding business contributions and geography, I guess. Most companies try to be good citizens of their communities. With that in mind, does the commission offer any guarantee to a company, we'll say in Erie or Du Bois, wherever, that they invest in early learning, that those funds will benefit their local community and be used in their local community?
Well, I can speak from an Erie Insurance perspective, and I'm sure there are other businesses, across our state that would kind of, I'll use the word require, although that sounds a little harsh.
Right.
But, we get quite a few requests for support, whether it's at the early learning, area or, education as a broader kind of umbrella. And one thing that we're pretty clear about with those organizations that are requesting funds from us as a business is that we need to understand their expected outcomes, because we all have trade-off decisions. We only have so many dollars available to really commit into the community. But education is certainly one of our pillars that we look for. So I guess to answer your question, the way I would think about it is, in those outcomes, we can make a decision on, is it impacting our community? Will we see the impact that we expected? And will we be able to hold those organizations accountable to deliver? Because when they show up the next year for the next program, if they're not delivering or not having the impact that we thought, we may divert the funds somewhere else to another organization that maybe is having the impact, or maybe a newer program that's emerging.
Yeah, that only makes sense. We're talking with Chris Marsh, the Chief Community and Economic Development Officer for the Erie Insurance Group, who is also a member of the Pennsylvania Early Learning Investment Commission. And Chris, I wanted to talk to you about the importance of our earliest kiddos from the ages from birth through age 2. We do separate in terms of funding streams, childcare and preschool. And yet we know how important the funding is for infant and toddler care, which is what we consider childcare. And what we know, research tells us about brain development. And the most rapid form of the brain develops in those earliest years. And so in Pennsylvania nationally, we are particularly pushing and campaigning for funding, additional funding, even on the federal level, to address infant and toddler care, because we're recognizing through research that we really need to do a deeper dive into the resources in infant toddler care. Has this been brought up in your dealings with the Investment Commission and with other folks? I know you've had little ones, so you certainly would know about this.
Yeah. You kind of, we call them sponges.
Yes.
As you're watching every minute, as your child is growing through those months, in those early years, it's so fun to watch. At the same time, to your point, it's so critical. I think we're getting traction on that.
Right.
To be quite honest, the commission talked about that. Actually, we had one of our lunch speakers was an educator from the Washington D.C. area, and I thought she did an incredible job of sharing the importance of that stage. Again, I think it really has to go back to raising awareness and seeking out those advocates at the public-private sector side that's, knocking on doors of the business, knocking on the Erie Community Foundation, the United Ways, across the state, because it is critical. And I do believe, though, there is still some perception that is child care equal to babysitting.
Yeah,
and we know it is so much more than that. So we certainly have work ahead of us there, but the commission did talk about that and the importance of that early stage, and so it is definitely on our radar.
Yes, definitely. And I think that is a public perception thing about the difference between childcare and preschool, and yes, the whole babysitting perception that many, not all, but many in the public still see it that way. And there's just a campaign that was just launched this week in Harrisburg. It's called Start Strong PA, and this is obviously using a lot of the data from the Heckman research, is trying to get the word out to the public about how important those earliest years are. Most of the growth in IQ in terms of cognitive skills has taken place by age 3. So it's not that children are invariably set in stone at age 3, but a lot of IQ growth is occurring in the very early years. That's directly attributed to James Heckman. So we have about 1 minute left. We're going to have to close out here pretty quick. So
okay.
Tell me a little bit, Chris, about what your next plans are with the commission.
Sure. Well, we have a new executive director, Ryan Riley, that was recently announced. I offered to Ryan and to Sarah, who's the assistant director, now served as the interim director, that we would host Ryan here in our region early on, hopefully March. So this way he can see and understand a little bit more about what's going on here. But what I'm encouraged about, very much like I was with Carrie Harris prior, is his experience in this field from pre-K all the way to post-secondary. He's had influence over policy for the last decade. So I'm very encouraged in working with him and under his leadership and understanding where we can move the needle more to have greater impact for generations to come.
That's great. Our time is up. Chris, we thank you so much for being on the program and hope to have you back again.
And that's our program for today. We'll be back in 2 weeks at this same time. In the meantime, you can go online to learn more at papromiseforchildren.com. For John Posa and the Early Learning Resource Center, I'm Joe Taylor. Thank you for listening, and have a great day.